Have you ever felt the fear of a story so dark that it gives you chills, and the pain of seeing something great being destroyed in a cruel and senseless way? Today, we will learn about one of the most terrifying periods in Roman history and uncover the secret history of Nero, the cruel emperor who, it is said, was capable of burning down his own capital. Get ready to learn the truth that Rome tried to hide, and that will make you tremble. Nero, the emperor who became king too young. Just imagine, you have only 16 years old, is in the prime of adolescence, full of energy and ideas in your head. Now think that, instead of worrying about school or what you're going to do on the weekend, you suddenly find yourself in command of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. Rome. Well, that's exactly what happened to a boy named Black. He was not just any prince, he became the last emperor from a super famous and powerful family, the Julio-Claudians. This group included names like Julius, Caesar and Augustus, people who made history. When Nero ascended to the throne, it was as if the whole world was watching him. A young man with so much power in his hands, and right in the center of the Roman Empire, which at the time was basically the known world. It was a huge responsibility, the kind that would make anyone tremble to their core. But Nero didn't tremble. In fact, he brought with him a host of ideas and attitudes that, to the surprise of many, ended up marking his reign in a very dark way. Think about how his life, from the day he sat on the throne, was a roller coaster of events. Suddenly, this teenager was making decisions that would affect millions of people, from the simplest laws to the life and death of his subjects. And the most curious thing is that at first, many people saw him with hope as a breath of fresh air after older and perhaps more serious emperors. No one imagined that Nero's story would become synonymous with tyranny and cruelty. But how did such a young boy get to this point? That is the big question we are going to unravel. The beginning of his history and power is the starting point to understand how a young emperor became a legend, but not in the way he probably dreamed. Nero, the Christian name and the family weight. You know when you are born and your parents give you a name, and that name stays with you for the rest of your life. Black was no different, but the name he received at birth was very different from what we know today. He came into the world on the day December 15th, 37 AD. Just imagine, almost 2,000 years ago, and his full name was, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. Quite a name, huh? He was born in a city that was very close to Rome, called Elder. But the most interesting thing about Nero's birth wasn't just the big name or the city, it was the family where he came from. Think of a powerful family, one that has influence, money, and a lot of important people in the family tree. That was the case with Nero's family. His father, for example, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, was none other than the grandson of Mark Antony. Yes, that Mark Antony, the famous Roman general who was friends with Julius Caesar and later got involved with Cleopatra. And Nero's grandmother on his father's side was Octavia, a minor, who was the sister of Augustus, the very first emperor of Rome. Do you now understand the weight of this lineage? It's as if he was born with a VIP passport to power. He wasn't just any kid. He was part of one of the most influential and traditional families in Rome. From the cradle, he was already connected to the people who shaped the empire. This rich and powerful family heritage was Nero's starting point, and it was already clear that he would not have an ordinary life. But having a famous family doesn't always mean having an easy life, and Nero's story is proof of that. The shadow of loss. Nero orphaned at an early age. The life of Black started with all that glamour of a super important family, remember? But not everything was rosy, and soon he experienced the pain of loss. It turns out that his father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, he who was the grandson of Mark Antony, the famous general, did not live long. Imagine the scene. Nero was just a baby, fresh out of diapers. More precisely, he had only 2 years old when sad news arrived. His father, Gnu, had passed away. This was in year 39 after Christ. Think about the smallness of a 2-year-old child who has barely started to walk and talk, losing his father. It is an experience that leaves a mark on anyone, even if he was not fully aware of it at the time. With the death of the father, Nero became an orphan at a very, very early age. He was still a baby, and this loss meant that he would grow up without a father figure around. For a child who was destined to be an emperor, growing up without a father present was an important detail, which could influence a lot in his life and formation. This is one of those parts of the story that makes you wonder, how could a child who lost his father so young and from a family with so many scandals become the emperor we know. The absence of his father, coupled with other family twists and turns that we have yet to see, certainly shaped the path of young Nero in ways he perhaps could not have imagined. Okay, let's move on with the story. And now we enter a chapter that shows how Nero's mother was a great strategist. Before continuing, check if you are subscribed to our channel. Only here you will find the best stories about Rome, the strategic marriage, Agrippina and the emperor's heart. Remember that the young man's life, black, wasn't it just easy even with that famous family? Well, after his father passed away and his mother Agrippina went through ups and downs, luck began to change. Agrippina was an intelligent woman with enormous ambition. She always thought about her son's future and her own. The big turning point came after the emperor's third wife, Claudia. Yes, another emperor of Rome, called Messalina, was executed. This Messalina did so much mischief that she ended up conspiring against her own husband, the emperor, and paid a high price for it. With Messalina out of the way, there was an empty space in Claudius's heart, and more importantly, next to the imperial throne. You'd think an emperor couldn't be alone for long, right? The pressure from the Senate, the chatter in the palace corridors, and especially Agrippina's political cunning, all of this came together. Agrippina was Claudius's niece, and even though at the time it was not very common for an uncle to marry his niece, it was even frowned upon by Roman society, Agrippina's influence was so great that she managed to convince Claudius to marry her. It was a marriage that changed everything. Suddenly, Agrippina became the new empress, and that meant something super important to Black. His mother was now at the center of power. Not only did she have a very strong voice in the decisions of the empire, whispering advice and influence into Claudius's ear, but she also began to shape your child's future. It was as if she was setting the stage, arranging everything so that Nero could one day shine in the leading role, that of emperor. This marriage was a gigantic and strategic step in putting Nero on the path to the throne. Of course, let's move on to the fifth topic, which is where Agrippina shows all her power of manipulation to guarantee her son's future. Agrippina's master plan. Nero on the path to the throne. After becoming the empress, the Agrippina didn't waste any time. She had a clear goal in mind, ensure that her son, Nero, would be the next emperor. And to achieve this, she spared no effort, not even a good dose of persuasion and strategy. Imagine the scene. Agrippina, now married to the emperor Claudio, begins working behind the scenes. She was a very intelligent woman and knew exactly how to influence people. Her main target? Claudio himself. She began to plant the seed in his head, convincing him that Nero was the best option to be his successor. And she succeeded. Claudius, under the influence of his wife, made a decision that would change Nero's life forever. He adopted Nero as his son and successor. This was a huge step. To seal this adoption and give even more weight to the future emperor, Nero's name was changed to a super pompous one. Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. It's as if he gained a royal surname, which linked him directly to the great names of the empire. But Agrippina didn't stop there. She knew that a future emperor needed the best education, so she made sure that Nero had a reputable tutor, Seneca the Younger. Seneca was a very famous philosopher and writer at the time, one of the greatest intellectuals in Rome. With Seneca at Nero's side, Agrippina was sure that her son would receive the best possible preparation for the throne. And to make sure that no one would get in the way of the plans, Agrippina also took it upon herself to keep away any competition. Claudius had a biological son with his previous wife, named British. Agrippina did everything she could to ensure that Britannicus was deprived of his inheritance rights and isolated from his father. She was determined to keep Nero as the sole and main heir. This was Agrippina's masterstroke. She moved all the pieces on the board so that Nero, her son, would be at the top of the line to become the next ruler of Rome. Perfect. Let's move on to the sixth topic, which shows that not everything went as planned by Agrippina, and Emperor Claudius began to change his mind. So, what do you think of the story? Leave your opinion in the comments. Claudius's change of course, a legitimate son and the awakening of the emperor. Remember how the Agrippina was smart to put her son, the Black, on the way to the throne. She manipulated, convinced the Emperor Claudiotto adopt Nero, and even removed Claudius's biological son, British. It seemed like her plan was infallible. But life and emperors are full of surprises. Over time, Emperor Claudius began to open his eyes and regret some of his decisions. He realized Agrippina's maneuvers, the way she was controlling everything and pushing away Britannicus, who was her blood son. Claudius was a man who cared about the future of Rome, and he began to think, is Nero really the best ruler after me? Or would my legitimate son, Britannicus, be more worthy? Do you think Claudio started talking openly about the possibility of divorce Agrippina? That would have been quite a scandal at the time, and a huge blow to her plans. And not only that, he also thought about dismiss Nero, that is, to remove Nero from the line of succession, since he no longer needed him for his own plans. An ancient historian named Suetonius, who wrote about the lives of emperors, says that Claudius really wanted Rome to be ruled by a worthy leader, a true Caesar, and for him, that true Caesar was British, his legitimate son. Claudius began to pay more attention to Britannicus, to prepare him for the throne, to teach him about the empire. This change in Claudio's attitude generated a huge resentment within the palace. Imagine the tension. Agrippina, who had everything under control, saw her plans falling apart. Nero, who already felt like the future emperor, saw his place threatened. This turnaround by Claudius, favoring Britannicus, was what gave Agrippina a very, very strong reason to plot something even darker. She was not going to let her plans be destroyed so easily. The suspicious death of Claudius, the clear path for Nero. The tension in the palace was palpable. Claudio was clearly changing his mind about the succession, and the Agrippina didn't like it one bit after all. Her plan to put Black on the throne was at risk. This turnaround by the emperor, favoring his biological son, British, gave Agrippina the perfect reason to act drastically. Imagine the scene. It was the October 13th, 54 AD, and the imperial family was gathered for a banquet. It was an evening like many others, with food, wine, and conversation, but for Claudius, this would be his last meal. He would have been served with poisoned mushrooms. Yes, those mushrooms that seem harmless but can hide a deadly danger. The ancient stories told by historians of the time are quite straightforward. They point out Agrippina as the mastermind behind this poisoning. It's as if she was saying, if you won't follow my plan, I'll make my own way. She didn't hesitate to use extreme methods to secure the future she had planned for her son. With Claudio's sudden death, the path was free and unhindered to Nero. There was no time for discussion, for Britannicus to be recognized, or for the senators to consider other options. Nero, just 16 years old, quickly ascended the throne of Rome, becoming the new emperor. This death of Claudius, shrouded in mystery and suspicions of poison, is one of the most remarkable moments in Nero's history. It shows how ruthless Agrippina could be in achieving her goals, and how determined she was to see her son in power. Of course, let's move on to the 8th topic, which is one of the most dramatic and darkest in Nero's story. Get ready. The end of Agrippina, the emperor against his own mother. The relationship between Black and his mother, Agrippina, had been worn out for a while, remember? She was ambitious and wanted to control her son, but Nero, now emperor, was increasingly independent and wanted to have his own power, without the shadow of his mother. The tension between them was like a pressure cooker about to explode. The point of no return has arrived. End of the year 58 after Christ. Agrippina, who had always been a natural strategist, was accused of conspiring to overthrow Nero. Just imagine, the emperor's mother plotting against her own son. What's more, she discovered Nero's secret. He was having a secret relationship with a woman named Poppaea, Sabina, who was married to a friend of his. This information was a bombshell, which could further tarnish Nero's reputation. Nero wanted to divorce his wife Octavia and marry Poppaea, but he knew that as long as Agrippina was alive, this would be impossible. His mother would never allow it. So a terrible idea began to take shape in Nero's mind. He decided that he had to eliminate his own mother. The accounts of historians of the time, such as Tacitus, describe a plan as ingenious as it was cruel. Nero thought of several ways to take Agrippina's life, but he wanted something that would look like an accident, so as not to arouse suspicion. The idea he came up with was macabre, to build a special boat that would sink on its own while Agrippina was on board. Imagine the scene. Agrippina is invited to go on a boat trip, thinking it would be a peaceful journey, but halfway through, the roof of the boat, which was heavy, collapsed on her. By pure luck, she managed to escape the impact. The crew, seeing that their plan had failed, tried to sink the boat on purpose. Agrippina, despite everything, was a strong woman and managed to swim to shore, where she was welcomed by a crowd that had no idea what had happened. But the betrayal did not stop there. A friend of Agrippina, who was with her, was attacked in the water and drowned, while screaming that she was Agrippina, unaware that she was the target of the conspiracy. When news that Agrippina had survived reached Nero, he was furious. He could not let her escape, so he sent 3 killers to ensure that his mother did not come out alive this time. Nero, the emperor, had ordered the death of his own mother. This act shocked Rome and marked a point of no return in his reign, showing the lengths to which he was willing to go to maintain his power and his desires. The fall of Nero, persecution, madness, and the burning of Rome. With Mother Agrippina out of the way, a decision that weighed on his conscience and gave him nightmares, the reign of Black began to go downhill once and for all. It was as if without Agrippina's controlling and strategic influence, however questionable she was, Nero lost his way and became even more autocratic. That is, he was the only one in charge, and no one else's opinion mattered. He began to alienate and even accuse his closest and most influential advisors, those who had previously advised him. His former tutor, the wise Seneca, who had prepared him for the throne, was also the target of accusations and had to withdraw from public life. Nero's relationship with the Roman Senate, which was like our Congress, but much more powerful at the time, got much worse. He began to see treason everywhere, holding false trials and executing rivals. This showed a growing paranoia and a deep distrust of the aristocracy of Rome. Nero's personal life also fell into chaos. He divorced and executed his first wife, Ottawa, and later controversially married a former slave named Pythagoras. These attitudes caused more and more criticism and disapproval from the Roman people, who were already watching his oddities. But the event that marked Nero's reign forever, and which many associate directly with him, was the Great Fire of Rome. On the night of July 18th to 19 of the year 64 after Christ, the city of Rome, which was made mostly of wood, caught fire. The fire spread quickly, driven by strong winds, and consumed much of the capital of the empire. It was a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. 3 of Rome's 14 districts were completely destroyed, and another 7 suffered severe damage. The city was under threat of flames for over a week. While some saw the fire as a tragic accident due to the way the city was built, others pointed the finger at Black, accusing him of having ordered the fire. They wanted him to be the scapegoat. And what did Nero do? To divert suspicion from himself, he found an easy and unpopular target at the time: the Christians. He accused them of being responsible for the fire, triggering one of the largest and most brutal persecutions in history. Hundreds of Christians were arrested, tortured, and executed on a mass scale. Some were burned alive in horrific public spectacles. This event not only marked the beginning of intense persecution against Christians, but also showed how cruel Nero could be in blaming innocent people to save his own skin. The reconstruction of Rome cost a fortune, which led to an increase in taxes throughout the empire and the devaluation of the currency, causing inflation. All of this only increased the tension between the emperor and the people, who already did not view him favorably. The last days of Nero: bizarre marriage, rebellions, and a lonely end. The life of Black continued his rapid decline after the Great Fire and the persecution of Christians. He seemed to have spiraled into increasingly erratic and cruel behavior. In 65 DC, he caused the death of his wife, Poppaea Sabina, the same woman whose mother he had murdered so he could marry. They say he kicked her to death even though she was pregnant. It is a shocking scene that shows the level of violence and lack of control he had reached. 2 years later, in 67 DC, Nero performed one of the most bizarre acts of his reign. He married a young man named Spore. What makes this even stranger is that Sporus had an appearance that strongly resembled Poppaea, the wife Nero had killed. Supposedly, driven by remorse, Nero performed a marriage ceremony with Sporus, but first sent castrate the boy. It is an event that illustrates the mental confusion and moral decay that took hold of the emperor. But Nero's extravagances and tyranny were numbered. The empire, already dissatisfied, began to rise up against him. In March 68 AD, the governor of Gaul, Caio Julio Vindex, started a rebellion against Nero's oppressive tax policies. Although this rebellion was defeated, it was like a lit fuse. Dissatisfaction spread like wildfire. Other Governors and legions, the Roman armies, began to lose patience. Lucius Virginius Rufus, governor of Germania Superior, was facing pressure from his own disgruntled troops. And then a man named Servius Sulpicius Galba, who was governor of Hispania, declared himself emperor versus Nero. The situation became even worse when the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, which was the emperor's personal guard, himself deserted and joined Galba. Nero was losing all support. He tried to flee Rome, but his own army. Officers refused to obey his orders. In desperation, he considered fleeing to a distant kingdom or begging the people for forgiveness. But when he returned to the palace, he found it empty. His friends and guards had abandoned him. Without options and without support, Nero decided to take his own life. This happened in 9th of June 68 AD, which ironically was the anniversary of the death of his first wife, Octavia. It is said that as he lay dying, a knight entered and tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. Nero's last words are attributed to him as being, "Too late. This is loyalty." With the death of Nero, the people and nobility of Rome celebrated. His name was removed from monuments, and an era came to an end. The reign of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which began with Augustus and included figures such as Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius, came to its tragic and bloody end with Nero. This event opened the door to a period of great political instability in Rome, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, in which power would be violently disputed, the shadow of Nero and the legacy of Rome. And so we come to the end of the story of Black, an emperor who, from a promising young man, became one of the most controversial and cruel figures in Rome. His reign, marked by ill-considered decisions, personal tragedies, and acts of pure tyranny, such as the terrible fire of Rome and the persecution of Christians, left an indelible stain on the history of the empire. Nero was the last link in a great Julio-Claudian dynasty that shaped the early history of Rome. His death was not just the end of a man, but the end of an era, ushering in a period of instability and new power struggles that would change Rome forever. Nero's story makes us reflect on the weight of power, the consequences of unbridled ambition, and how the personality of a single leader can impact millions of lives. If you enjoyed uncovering Nero's dark life and want to continue exploring the mysteries and glories of the Roman Empire, we have a complete playlist of videos about Rome waiting for you. There you will meet other fascinating emperors, epic battles and secrets that shaped Western civilization. Watch our playlist about Rome, and don't forget to leave your like in this video if you liked the story of Nero. Leave a comment saying what you thought and, of course, subscribe to our channels. You don't miss any of our upcoming history videos.